looking for cracks that you can see actually here in the
If one day the Mount of Olives truly begins to move, would it be the sound of shifting earth, or the whisper of an ancient prophecy being stirred? In this video, you are invited to step onto that mountain, to stand between scripture and seismic tremors, and to ask, what if this is more than just geology? For thousands of years, the Mount of Olives has stood overlooking Jerusalem, a place where history, faith, and humanity's deepest wounds converge. It has watched kings flee in despair, prophets pray through tears, pilgrims ascend with expectation, and empires rise and fall beneath its gaze. It is more than a geographic feature. In the collective memory of humanity, the Mount of Olives exists as a threshold, a place where heaven and earth seem unsettlingly close. If the following touches your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to follow more meaningful journeys like this. In recent months, that ancient sense of expectation has resurfaced with unusual intensity. A surge of attention has focused on the Mount of Olives and the prophecy in Zechariah 14, raising questions about whether humanity is witnessing the early stirrings of an ancient biblical prediction coming to life. In a widely shared video, modern observations of geological shifts, cracks, and subtle movements on the Mount of Olives are placed side by side with Zechariah's words about a day when this very mountain would split in two, from east to west. This convergence of vivid current imagery and powerful prophetic scripture invites viewers to consider not only what is happening in the land of Israel physically, but also what may be unfolding spiritually on the global stage. According to the narrative presented, witnesses on the Mount of Olives experienced a gentle but unmistakable vibration at approximately 4:14 a.m. The tremor is described not as violent or destructive, but as arresting enough to cause people to stop mid-step, to fall silent, and to sense that something unusual had taken place. The time itself is treated as symbolically significant, linked to images of light breaking into darkness and new beginnings. What follows is an interpretation that moves quickly from observation to meaning. For some, this was not merely geological, but prophetic, what many perceive as a whisper of Zechariah 14:4 echoing through stone and soil. At the heart of this interpretation lies Zechariah 14:4, a verse that describes a future moment when the feet of the Lord will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, causing the mountain to split from east to west and creating a massive valley, with half of the mountain moving north and the other half moving south. For centuries, believers have read this as a key description of the second coming of the Messiah and the dramatic events surrounding the end of the age. The video revisits this text not as a distant theological idea, but as something that may be connected to visible changes taking place right now, including reported fissures forming along an east-west orientation and ground instability that appears to mirror the biblical direction. The Mount of Olives is not introduced merely as a location, but as sacred space. It is remembered as the place of Jesus' ascension, a site of prayer, tears, betrayal, and prophetic declarations, making it one of the most spiritually charged locations in the world. By reminding viewers of this layered history, the narrative amplifies the emotional and spiritual impact of the idea that the mountain itself may be preparing for a climactic moment described thousands of years ago. This sense of holy geography, where stones, soil, and fault lines are tied to divine promises, runs strongly through the message, and creates a powerful sense of solemn awe, not fear that paralyzes, but awe that calls for reflection. Alongside theological reflection, the video weaves in reports, images, and descriptions of recent geological phenomena on and around the Mount of Olives. It refers to cracks in the ground, shifts along existing fault lines, and subtle earth movements that have raised questions among locals and observers. Some accounts mention early morning hours when unusual vibrations or tremors were felt, creating a sense of eerie precision that viewers are encouraged to connect with a prophetic timetable. The overall impression is that the land is less stable than many once assumed, that the ground beneath Jerusalem is, quite literally, moving. Yet, the emotional power of this narrative, while undeniable, is not enough on its own to determine truth. To understand what may truly be unfolding, the story also slows down to consider the ground beneath the story, both literally and figuratively. From a scientific perspective, the region surrounding Jerusalem is no stranger to movement. The city lies near the Dead Sea Transform Fault, a major tectonic boundary separating the African plate from the Arabian plate. This fault system has shaped the Jordan Rift Valley for millions of years. The plates move only a few millimeters per year, but over long periods of time, stress accumulates, and when that stress is released, earthquakes occur. History confirms this reality. Jerusalem has experienced destructive earthquakes in the past, including significant events in antiquity and more recent times, such as the 1927 earthquake that caused widespread damage across the region. The Mount of Olives itself is composed largely of chalk and limestone, relatively soft materials that are prone to erosion, fracturing, and landslides. During 20th century construction projects, engineers documented existing fault lines running through the mountain, notably oriented from east to west. These details understandably capture the imagination of those familiar with Zechariah's words. From this perspective, cracks in stone, gradual shifts, and even minor tremors are not extraordinary. They are consistent with the known geological character of the region. But for many, watching from a distance, data alone does not silence the deeper question. Could this still be a sign? What science does not confirm, however, is that the Mount of Olives is currently in the process of splitting in two, or that recent minor vibrations represent a unique or unprecedented event. Small tremors can occur without leading to major earthquakes. Surface cracks may result from weathering, construction, or long-term stress release. None of these phenomena, on their own, constitute evidence that a specific prophetic moment is unfolding. The tension between these two explanations, prophetic and scientific, becomes a central theme. On one side, believers and prophecy watchers see these phenomena as birth pangs or early signs pointing toward the ultimate fulfillment of Zechariah's vision. On the other side, skeptics and secular observers argue that humans have a tendency to overlay meaning on top of random or natural events, reading patterns and signs where none were intended. From a faith perspective, the message leans toward the view that God often uses natural means to accomplish supernatural purposes. Earthquakes, storms, and cosmic signs throughout Scripture are frequently portrayed as both physical and spiritual events, carrying messages of judgment, mercy, or transition into a new era. The suggestion is that geological stress and tectonic tension under the Mount of Olives may be tools in the hand of a sovereign God, preparing the landscape for a future day when prophecy will be fulfilled in a way that is both natural and undeniably divine. This approach allows viewers to acknowledge the role of science while still preserving a strong sense of prophetic expectation. Yet the heart of the issue is not only how the mountain might move, but why these stories spread so rapidly and resonate so deeply. The answer may lie not in Jerusalem alone, but in the global moment being inhabited right now. This is an age of instability marked by war, political division, economic anxiety, environmental uncertainty, and a widespread sense that familiar structures are eroding. In such times, humanity has always returned to apocalyptic language, not because it is irrational, but because it gives voice to a feeling that is otherwise difficult to articulate. The sense that something is coming, that the world as it is cannot continue unchanged. Jerusalem, perhaps more than any other city, becomes the symbolic center of that feeling. It is sacred geography. Events associated with it carry weight far beyond their physical scale. A tremor there feels global. Water flowing there feels cosmic. The city becomes a mirror, reflecting the fears, hopes, and longings of millions. This is why a minor crack in a Jerusalem stone can capture more attention than a major fracture somewhere else. The Mount of Olives, in particular, becomes a screen onto which the world projects its deepest questions about justice, judgment, hope, and the end of history. The danger arises when this longing is shaped by sensationalism rather than discernment. Sensationalism thrives on urgency without patience, on certainty without humility. It frames every movement as a final sign and every coincidence as confirmation. In doing so, it risks distorting both faith and reality, turning prophecy into a form of spiritual entertainment rather than a call to faithful living. Discernment, by contrast, asks harder questions. What do we know, and what are we assuming? What is observed, and what is interpreted? How should belief change the way life is lived, not just the way timelines are discussed? One of the great ironies of prophetic obsession is that it can distract from the very purpose prophecy serves. When fear becomes the primary motivator, faith shrinks into anxiety. When attention is fixed entirely on signs, the slow, demanding work of love, justice, and humility is neglected. The biblical tradition repeatedly warns against prematurely declaring fulfillment. Jesus cautioned his followers not to be consumed by signs and dates, not to mistake rumors and disturbances for the final moment. He spoke instead of watchfulness, a posture of readiness defined not by panic, but by faithfulness, mercy, and endurance. Throughout this kind of message, Jerusalem is portrayed as the epicenter of God's redemptive plan, and the Mount of Olives as a prophetic focal point. Many prophecies about Israel's restoration, the regathering of the Jewish people, and the central role of Jerusalem in end-times events have already seen partial or substantial fulfillment in modern history. This track record is often used as evidence that remaining prophecies, including the dramatic reshaping of the Mount of Olives, are not mere poetry, but future realities. The present shakings, whether small or great, are thus interpreted as part of a long trajectory of divine faithfulness and unfolding purpose. Stripped of exaggeration, the question at the heart of this moment remains compelling, but it changes form. It is no longer simply whether the Mount of Olives is moving. It becomes a question about why there is such eagerness for it to move. What longing lies beneath the fascination with signs? Perhaps it is a longing for justice in a world that feels unjust, or for resolution in the face of suffering and confusion. Perhaps it is the hope that history is guided, that there is a purpose beyond the chaos witnessed daily. In this sense, the interest in prophecy is deeply human. It is not wrong to ask whether this time has meaning. What matters is how the question is held. True watchfulness is not passive waiting for catastrophe or spectacle. It is an active attentiveness to life as it is lived now. It asks whether people are reconciled to one another, whether they are truthful, whether they are awake to the suffering around them. It is less concerned with reading cracks in stone than with recognizing fractures in the human heart. The Mount of Olives still stands. It has endured earthquakes before, and will likely endure them again. Whether one day the mountain splits through natural processes or divine intervention remains unknown. What is known is this: the posture of those watching matters more than the movement of the mountain itself. Fear and haste will always distort perception. Patience and humility keep the door open to truth.